the summer, the two principles that we follow were, first and foremost, the health and safety of the university community, and then second was sustaining the institution, and in particular, frankly, from a financial perspective. It was a very challenging economic environment in March of 2020 with a lot of uncertainty. If you all wherever you are, I'm sure you all remember where you are when certain things happened in March of 2020. But there were a lot of things going on within the financial markets, with the university's overall liquidity position in terms of our cash position, things along those lines, and things that we had to do to make sure that we were able to sustain the university. And I'm happy to say, aside from some very, very challenging decisions along the way, some obviously some really challenging times from a health perspective for the university from a financial positioning is actually in excellent shape right now, particularly from an overall balance sheet perspective. I'll just say that, from an SGA perspective, you guys have all, Drew and Hannah and their predecessors before them have just been great partners going back to returning to campus in the fall of 2020. And in particular, at that point, we were trying to really convince people how important masking was. And I remember going around the student neighborhood around campus and handing out masks and begging people to put masks on. But I know, SGA has been a great partner from the administration's perspective in our health and safety practices, and all the way through this day. And in particular, I believe, Drew, last semester we did the different vaccination campaigns and things along, actually going back to last spring, if I recall correctly, and really trying to get students to understand how important getting vaccinated could be. And so, again, we really appreciate that from an administration perspective. I'll just talk briefly about just the overall finances of the university. I'm sure in particular that's something that might be of interest from an overall budget perspective. So just the size of our balance sheet, for those of you that are not business majors, the size of our balance sheet, basically all of the assets of the institution, is about $2.1 billion. So we crossed $2 billion in the last year. About $1.1 billion of that is actually in our long-term investment pool. So that is $800 million of that is our endowment. So we have about $1.1 billion in wealth, $800 million is endowed, another $300 million in long-term reserves. We were not in that position in March of 2020. Just thinking about thinking about our revenues and our expenses. So just at a high level, our revenues we're still considered a tuition-driven, a student-driven institution, but I think from a revenue diversification perspective, we look a little bit different than a Xavier or a Marquette in terms of, particularly from a research perspective. So our net tuition revenue, so what you all pay to cover the university, when we add it all up, it's about $190 to $200 million a year, which is about a third of our operating revenue. Another 16%, about $100 million, is auxiliary revenue, which is from housing, dining, and athletics, primarily. A few other things in there, but those are the primary three sources of what we call our auxiliary revenues, as well as our bookstore. We do almost close to $200 million in grant and contract, so primarily research and UDRI-driven revenue. So that's a significant change over the last 7 or 8 years. That's about a third of our operating budget. Just 7 or 8 years ago, it was less than 20%. So really our proximity to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and some of the relationships we really developed with DoD and the Air Force have really helped us to grow that revenue piece of the university. And then about 15% of our revenues come from the gifts, the endowment, non-core real estate, and a few other items. So things like the Marriott and GE, and some other things that aren't necessarily making as much, bringing in as much revenue, whether it be on Main or the arcade, are things that are in that bucket as well. And then from an expense perspective, it's actually pretty simple. The number one expense for the university is people. So we spend about 60% of our operating budget simply on salaries and benefits, actually a little bit north of that, about $300 million in salaries and benefits. Another portion of that goes to contracts and maintenance, so in terms of maintaining the overall campus, as well as a lot of work at the Research Institute and things along those lines. So I can go into a lot more detail on anything you want to hear about relative to our budget and our finances. The last thing I'll just say, and then I'd be happy to open up for Q&A, is in the last, Drew, you're gonna have to help me with this, but I think it was this fiscal year, after you worked, I think with Amy and with Bill Fisher, we actually increased the budget of SGA by $70,000. Is that more? Less?
Less, 30.
Oh, okay. So I just gave you $40,000? No, I didn't. So kidding aside, but perhaps a little bit of just a
30 and 30.
Well, we did a two-part increase, so this year it was half, and next year it'll increase by another like 30 to 32. So
yeah. So the total number. So I was more right than you were, right?
Right.
All right. That's just say yes. Okay. So you're right. We did it over two. Now I'm recalling. We did it over 2 years. I think it's been a multi-year process in terms of making the justification. So generally from a university budgeting process, just at a high level, what we do from a budgeting perspective is there's all the academic units. So the college, the School of Engineering, the School of Education, Health Sciences, their deans and budget managers put forward requests for budgets, generally on an annual basis. We're actually in our fiscal 23 budget cycle right now. Fiscal 23 starts July 1 of this year, so just in a few months from now. Makes requests, student development, my unit, the provost's office, athletics, make a variety of different requests, both from a base budget and sort of like what we call new sustainable budget funding. And so when SGA has made that request, and I think it's been multiple years that SGA has been making requests, working with Amy and Bill, and putting that forward, and then what ultimately happens is it goes into basically a giant financial model that President Spina, Provost Benson, and I are primarily responsible for reviewing, making decisions about how we're going to fund it based on what our expected revenues are, what our expected expenses are. And so we can run basically what's called a positive operating margin. Simply put, it's somewhat of it's a profit. Even though we're a not-for-profit institution, we have to actually have our revenues, in general, on average, on an annual basis, exceed our expenses in order to sustain and grow the institution. So one misnomer people have about not-for-profit institutions, well, if you just break even, you're fine. You should be, you take in $100 million, you should spend $100 million. Actually, if that's what you're doing, you're generally shrinking over the long run because you're not allowing yourself to reinvest in the institution in future years. So our goal is to generally operate in a positive manner. So what we basically do is we look at the whole sort of pie and allocate, based on priorities from a strategic institutional perspective. And so we made the decision for SGA, given the growth in SGA and the number of clubs and activities that you all want to support, it was really important to find those additional dollars over this year and next year to increase. I think most of it's going to student organizations and the like, and some to SGA, but I think that was the sort of the overall plan. So that is just at a high level kind of my job, some of the things that I've been involved with the last few years, but I think the best thing we could do is just get to Q&A and discussion. So I'm happy to take, and any question is fair game.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
My question, how is like the increase in student tuition every other year? It does gradually increase. How's that determined like more in depth?
That's a good question. So, so a couple things. So first of all, everybody here is undergraduate, right? Is there a graduate? Okay, so everybody here is undergraduate. So generally, when you were accepted to the university, you all received basically an offer that, so it said your tuition is fixed for 4 years, right? For 8 semesters. So no increases for you personally, which is relatively new in the higher education industry. It used to be you have a sticker price increase, which I'm going to get back to in a second, and then that would get passed on to the student every year. So at the University of Dayton, we don't have fees, and we don't pass on sticker prices as you go through your progression from freshman to senior year. So So that's one sort of just overall framework. So, and the second thing is as we increase sticker price, it's not necessarily what we collect on a per student basis, because there's a lot of actually what we collect is, well, not collect is actually in the form of financial aid. But generally, how do we set our sticker price? It is an art and it is a science. And I think there's more art to it than science sometimes. But basically, we look at macroeconomic trends, we look at demographics, we look at the overall size of the student body given at our point in time, and how big we want the next class to be, or how small, if we want to try to make sure that we have the right number that we can fit everybody on campus and classrooms and in our housing. And then ultimately, what are our peers doing? What are our competitors doing? And one area is a lot of our competitors were more highly priced than from a sticker pricing perspective, because a lot of our competitors actually are not necessarily Xavier or Marquette or John Carroll. It's more Ohio State, Miami, it's UC. So from a pricing perspective, it's quite a bit different. But generally, we look at a variety of different factors and try to pass on a price increase that makes sense. But quite frankly, the last few years, we've passed. I think we didn't increase tuition this year. We're increasing it next year by 2.9%. A couple years ago, we raised it less than 2%. So frankly, we're very limited because of our sticker price and how much we can increase it at this point. And rightfully so. I mean, we understand our sticker price is fairly high from just an overall market perspective. And we probably have reached the tipping point in terms of how much more we can grow sticker price. And we're at the same time we're increasing sticker price, we're putting more institutional aid on the table. So at the end of the day, even though we increased sticker price by 2.9% this fall, we won't get 2.9% more in revenue because we put that much more in aid on the table as well. But generally, punchline, the short answer to your question is it's a sort of an iterative process with some analysis, some art to it, and then ultimately it's the president, provost, myself, along with the vice president for enrollment management, who is Jason Reinhold, make that decision, and we recommend it to the board either in November or December of the year prior to it being implemented for the following fall. Drew.
Could you talk a little bit about CSET?
CSET. So CSET is the Committee for Sustainable Institutional Transformation. Have you talked about CSET at all in here?
Some, but yeah, at a high level.
At a high level, okay. So you're loosely aware that there's something called CSET. Okay, so I began my remarks by saying that the university is in a very good position financially, and that's absolutely true. From an overall wealth and balance sheet perspective, it's actually pretty much as strong as ever. Largely built on two things. One is, aside from the last month to month and a half of very strong financial markets that have allowed our endowment to grow by 32% over a 12-month period for the last fiscal year. So again, we went from $800 million to $1.1 billion in the middle of COVID, which was nothing I would have ever predicted ever. I thought we were going to really have to weather a much worse storm. If you remember what the financial markets were doing in February, March of 2020. We were also the beneficiary from the federal government of quite a bit in emergency aid. So if you recall, there have been 3 or 4 bills that the feds actually passed going back to the spring of 2020. In each of those, there was actually money for higher education institutions, so direct grants to us, to literally every higher education, accredited higher education institution in the U.S. It was generally calculated based on a variety of factors, but one was how much aid actually that we provided to our students, in particular Pell eligible students. And so we're pretty strong in terms of the amount of institutional aid we provide to Pell eligible students. So we received upwards of almost $40 million in direct institutional aid. Some of that was, we were just the agent and we just passed it through to students. We were required to actually give out emergency grants to students. And we gave out thousands over the last 2 years. But we were able to collect some of that as revenue to offset COVID costs, to offset losses in housing and dining and things along those lines. So that's helped us from a wealth perspective. But as we have, actually this is kind of related to your question as well, we're still primarily an undergraduate institution, primarily undergraduate institution. And with where just overall college age demographics have gone, who our competitive set is, and from a pricing perspective, our ability to continue to grow tuition revenues relative to the growth in our cost structure is much more constrained. So I won't get into the calculation with you, but in 2015, our operating margin, basically our profit margin, was 12% of revenues over expense. Last year it was 5%. This year our budget is 2.7%, and 2% of that is basically from the federal government. So if you really think about it, you peel it back, we have just over a break-even budget right now from just a revenue over expense perspective. So as we move forward through the rest of this decade, emerging from COVID, we're looking really carefully from an institutional perspective at how do we sustain ourselves from a cost and revenue perspective. And frankly, what it's going to require is some fairly significant changes in how we do business. And it touches every part of the institution. So we're looking at things within CSIT, just going through there's a couple really primarily academic related types of issues that we're looking at. Provost Benson is here and he can certainly add more, but one of those is just how faculty spend their time, how their workloads, how we utilize our classrooms, how many people are in a section, how many sections we're offering, tenure versus non-tenure track teaching. We're looking at graduate programs, and certain graduate programs are doing very, very well, and certain graduate programs are not doing as well from a financial perspective. And so just making sure that those graduate programs make sense as we go forward from an operating perspective. We're looking at just how we do budgeting. So I gave you what our budgeting process is. It's pretty antiquated, and it's not necessarily as strategic as it could be. So we're looking at how we might change our budgeting process to be more incentive-based going forward, particularly for academic units. We're looking at our overall cost structure in terms of at the level of enrollment that we are now, which is record. Can our revenues support our costs? And frankly, on these trajectories, they cannot. And so we have to make some decisions on how we can, frankly, right-size our cost structure. But at the center of this is to not negatively impact the student academic and residential experience, because those are core to who the University of Dayton is. So there are other things that we're looking at. We're looking at in terms of overall housing, in terms of what we do from a housing perspective. We have, you're required, if you don't live near campus, to basically live with us for 2 years. That's something, that's a question mark that we have out there in terms of whether that makes sense or not. And those are the big ones. And then the overall, frankly, undergraduate mix. But over the next 2 to 3 years, we have to make some really, challenging decisions. And I'll channel my inner President Spina, but there's just certain things that we have to stop doing. So the merriness have always kind of been, it's all for the common good and things along those lines. And so when somebody asks for something, we don't want to say no. We're really not good historically as an institution at saying no, and we have to probably start saying no a little bit more. Thanks for that question, Drew. Any other questions? Okay, thanks for having me.
Thanks again for joining us and for taking time out of your Sunday to be with us. I know we really appreciate your insight and really learning into kind of the other areas within the university. So thanks again for being with us today. So we are going to go a little bit out of order today, just due to some things that are going on. And if you can turn on the screen. As you were aware of last Sunday, we had talked about the bill of the disinvitation of Dr. Wolfgang, and we have invited the provost, Provost Benson, Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs, and Provost to be able to be with us and kind of talk through some of the Q&A that we might have as we begin discussion on this. So we have decided to talk about this bill outside of Senate floor, so a little more free conversation can happen. Those who typically can't speak on the floor can speak and really just have a little more robust discussion. So I would ask that Director Brown, if you kind of want to introduce the bill as it would be on Senate floor, except we're going to wait to go into Senate floor to vote, if that makes sense.
Do you want Provost Benson to speak first before we do that? Okay, I mean, just like, I'm not
Can
gonna
you
use mine.
go ahead and use the mic?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so, my Senate Resolution 2122-10, the disinvitation of Dr. Tilek Monkek. So basically, just like I said last week, the University of Dayton disinvited Dr. T, which we can call her for short, because I know her name can be a little bit challenging to pronounce. Drew did read off the statements for why the university disinvited her, and I shared some opinions for why I personally think. But I thought it would be better for us to have like an administrative perspective, but I think the most important thing is that we have an open conversation, because the university can make decisions, you know, and do certain things, but as a student body, we have a right to like disagree with the decisions being made. So I really just wanted to be an open dialogue about what you guys thought about the resources and what you guys think of the whole situation, and then we can kind of talk about what we can do to take a stand for it as a student government association. I yield my time.
Sure, so.
Turned off the microphone because it was giving feedback. So I'll invite Provost Benson to kind of give some words from the university side. I hope that all of you had taken the time to read the Flyer News article, go to the point in time where Provost Benson talked about this at the last Academic Senate meeting on Friday that Lily sent you all, as well as read a little more in depth into the statement that was also shared with you by Lily on Tuesday. So I'll invite Provost Benson to have a few remarks and then open up for some more conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Drew, and thanks, Jada, for bringing the issue forward. So I'd like to highlight just a few of the points that were made in the statement that I believe Drew read at the last SGA meeting on Sunday, and then I'll fill in just a little bit more detail. So first, it's really important to highlight a few things that this decision was not based on. So first, it's not based on an assessment of Dr. T's expertise or international reputation and special rapporteur for the right to health. We're also not trying to silence the expression of particular viewpoints. So I could give a long laundry list here, but we have regularly had speakers on campus who embrace views about women's reproductive rights that are at odds with Catholic social teaching. We also host speakers who adopt views about a wide range of social issues that are not in alignment with Catholic social teaching. The two primary issues at stake here were, first, that typically when there's an invitation extended for a high visibility major university event that the university promotes nationally and globally on our own marketing and communication channels. And the social practice of human rights is one of those events that the university actively promotes. Normally, there's advanced conversation before an invitation goes out about whether there might be issues that could affect the mission and identity of the university or a reputation in some way. This may be a distinction that seems a little bit foreign from the student standpoint, but it's a very important distinction between, on the one hand, inviting outside speakers to campus, in person or virtually, and on the other hand, restricting what's taught in the classroom or what faculty members research. The typical purview of academic freedom is what goes on in the classroom and in the curriculum that a department or major offers, and what faculty members do with their research. Neither of these is at issue here. The issue has to do with invitation of a speaker to a very high-profile event. And the particular concern was not about Dr. T's views or her own professional work and reputation. The issue is that Dr. T is herself an abortion provider, and we saw in especially her social media that she's not only an advocate for women's reproduction rights, she's very much an advocate of abortion. So she's quite unabashed in promoting abortion as a practice. The concern for us was not, especially in my case, my own individual judgments about this, but we are a Catholic and Marianist university. The Society of Mary sponsors the university. So the vice chair of the Board of Trustees must be the head of the Marianist province of the United States, and the board has to have a certain proportional representation of Marianists on the board. So our question was, first, we were not allowed to consult before the invitation was extended. And in my experience, both as dean in the college and now 8 years as provost, whenever there's been advanced discussion, we've been able to find ways to work with the speaker to feel reasonably comfortable about inviting them. But in this case, we weren't allowed to do that. The decision was made to invite, and there was, after repeated attempts, no openness to even discuss this issue. But then secondly, it's part of my job to be able to go to the Marianists and explain why we would bring someone who is quite an avid advocate of abortion to speak to the university when there are many possible speakers who could have addressed the theme of the conference, which had to do with COVID globally. So, I would just underscore, this is not a question about the academic freedom of faculty or students. It's limited to very high-profile engagements. And it's not a question of silencing views, but it is a question, at what point do we say our Catholic mission and identity places some boundaries on who we would invite to speak. So I really appreciate, again, Jade is bringing forward these concerns. I think they're important issues for students in the entire campus to discuss. And I'm happy to respond to questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thank you, Provost Benson, for sharing a little more detail and providing some additional context into what the disinvitation of Dr. T was surrounding. I think now, if there are any comments from others, including Director Brown, to speak a little more on the bill, I would welcome that now before we move forward. I'd also welcome if anybody has any questions, especially since we do have the provost with us, to bring forth those now.
Yeah, I would really like to hear other people's perspectives, not just mine.
Okay. Oh, okay, it's for me. I think that the university was right to disinvite Dr. T, just because, as the provost said, that we are a Catholic Marianist university, and personally I think it would have looked pretty bad on the university to host someone that performs abortions.
I agree. I also think like this institution was, whether or not you believe in what it was based off of, but it was built on a certain religion and a way of believing something, and every student that comes here is aware of that and also has the decision to come here or not. So I think UD's done a great job of like letting people think freely and having their academic freedom and not censoring things, but there is like a certain point where it is still based off of a certain teaching, and that's what it's gonna go by.
Yeah, I understand everyone's perspective. From my perspective, I think she wasn't here to talk about abortions at all. Like, abortion was not the topic of the conference. And while I understand that UD's like main identity is Catholic, I think that we also have the identity of the Human Rights Center. Like, University of Dayton was one of the first universities to have human rights as a major. Like, human rights is a really big aspect of our identity as well, so I think it's important to mention that. And also just like, abortion was not the topic of conversation.
I think I have a question for Provost Benson. I'm not quite sure what I'm asking here, so if somebody else has an answer, feel free. But you referenced a few times that there was a conversation that could have happened around her background that was not able to happen. Why didn't that happen?
Once the Human Rights Center had extended the invitation, they weren't willing to talk with the invited speaker or with others of us about this potential concern. They said the invitation has been extended, end of story. And I don't want to go into more of that, but I will simply say we made many efforts simply to discuss the issue. And in my experience, where we've had those discussions, we were able to find ways typically to move forward. And to go to the point that was made a moment ago that reproductive rights weren't the topic of the speech. We're well aware of that. But on the other hand, because we weren't able to speak to the speaker or the Human Rights Center, we really didn't know what she was going to say when she came here. And that was a concern about how the university would appear.
I was gonna say, to kind of add to it, I definitely agree with like Lily's point about like she wasn't here to talk about abortion, so like that shouldn't matter. But I don't want to like get caught up in like the, reason why she was disinvited, because I think like that's kind of like an opinions conversation. But I do think we could have a conversation about how to prevent this situation from happening again, because Dr. T, she's an amazing lady. Like, I follow her on social media and stuff, and she's an amazing, like, educator. But, like, because this happened, like, it kind of, like, burns a bridge in a way. Whether, like, regardless of what you think. Like, she's never going to come back here again. And, I really think that, like, that kind of leaves a bad taste in the mouth for, like, other people who may, like, identify the same way as Dr. T. Like, I know, like, within the Black community, especially, like, within the Black, like, educator community, when, like, stuff like that happens, like, people take note. Like, for, like, women of color, if they, like, see something like that, they'll be like, well, I don't know if I want to speak HD. So, like, instead of having a conversation of, like, and we can even change the bill. Like, I'm not opposed to changing the bill. I just want to have a conversation. But maybe we can have a conversation of how can we work with administration as UD to prevent stuff like this from happening. Because I know with, like, student orgs, like, if you're, like, I used to be in UD College Dems. Like, every speaker that we had to get approved, like, because of that reason. And so, like, maybe finding ways to make sure that, like, all senators on campus know that, or maybe even finding a way to have like a student perspective in those kind of conversations for who we're inviting at the university. But I don't think we should focus so much on like the reason. I think we should focus on like prevention. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think from what Provost Benson said, it sounded like there was some uncooperation from people on campus and even just the group that was responsible for inviting her, but also, like he said, they have worked with speakers in the past and done things so that they could come speak, because it's not anything about censoring students or letting them hear what they want to hear, support what they want to support. But in this situation, it does sound like there was uncooperation and nothing that they could really do. Because they also are funded by another group of people that was based on certain feelings, and at some point you can't really go against that, and everybody's like aware of what it is ahead of time. But if people are unwilling to compromise, then there's not much that certain people can do.
Yeah, I just had one question for Provost Benson. Like, what were those conversations like when you were, as Jada mentioned, the burning of the bridges? Like, when you guys made the decision to disinvite, how did you think that that would reflect on the university as compared to her coming?
So, two things. First, this was an extremely difficult decision to reach. I don't want to suggest that this was easy. And actually, I agree fully with Jada. This left a very bad taste in our mouths. This is something we would never want to do. However, we felt our hand was forced. Fortunately, the conference went off well. There were 10 Black women who were speakers on the conference, and the other keynotes were also keynotes who represent various underrepresented populations. So we did not see, at least an immediate negative impact. But I do agree with Jada that these are situations that are to be avoided. An upfront conversation and consultation from all parties, not just with the administration, is a really important thing. And clearly, we need to reach a point where there's this greater transparency and understanding about that. So I just have to say, I'm very much in favor of the kind of direction that Jada's recommending here for future engagement.
I just want to say this discussion's been very productive, and we've sort of worked out a lot of issues so far. And Jada has said that she wants to move in a more productive way on getting past this particular incident and looking forward. And I think that is a valid concern of women of color specifically, maybe not wanting to come to campus in the future because of this incident. So I think that we should sort of work in tandem with the administration and the student body. We can definitely do our part with reworking this legislation so that students understand the situation and what's going on and what we don't want to happen in the future. But what is the administration going to do on their half of it to make sure that specifically women of color understand what happened and what won't happen in the future?
Well, as Drew indicated, I presented to the Academic Senate and also a joint faculty and staff meeting last Friday and kind of walked through this to explain it. Clearly, we're going to be focused on making it more transparent about what sort of advanced conversations would be valuable before speakers to this kind of event that is high visibility, nationally and internationally promoted. What kinds of advanced conversations are required? So we're very committed to doing that and very committed to to engaging in that consultation. I will say, because people's reputations are involved here, both internally and externally, our impulse is not to engage in a lot of broader communication, which could actually hurt everyone affected by this, both at UD and also Dr. T, and we'd rather not provoke that kind of impact.
I think some of the comments that I would offer as our institution continues to talk about the importance of out-of-the-classroom learning. While Dr. T and her position as special repertoire for the United Nations would have been a wonderful experiential learning opportunity for students at the university to take part in, due to not only our Marianistan Catholic vision and mission, but as well as one of the core values in Marianist leadership is consultation and collaboration. And since that wasn't able to be done within this situation, the bill as it stands, I would disagree with, recognizing that the disinvitation was a very hard situation for the administration to come by, and by no means was something that they wanted to do, but due to the collaboration and consultation that was not able to happen, like in other areas, like the speaker series that the university has, as he said, the university was slightly forced their hand forward. But again, I don't want to underscore the importance of looking at this carefully and particularly to prevent a situation like this from happening again. But would disagree with the bill as it stands. Are there any other comments or questions while we still have the provost with us before we move forward in the Senate floor? Well, thank you, Provost Benson, for being with us this afternoon. Again, for taking time out of your Sunday on Super Bowl Sunday to be with us, and to be able to really continue to engage with student leaders as it's from the deepest of our hearts. Thank you for your willingness to collaborate and be here with us today. Moving forward, we do have two special requests with us today. James, if you'd like to introduce the first one.
Yes, right.
So we have two special requests tonight. First is from the women's volleyball. So we welcome you to the podium, and you'll have 10 minutes to present to SGA, and that will be followed by any questions that we might have.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Audrey, and I'm the treasurer for the Women's Club Volleyball team here on campus. And we're an organization that really strives to bring together a group of girls that want to improve their volleyball skills, contribute to a competitive team environment, remain active and fit, improve mental well-being, and create new relationships, all while we're having fun playing our favorite sport together. And one of our main goals for this year has been to attend the national tournament in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a highly competitive event where a bunch of college teams across the country come together to compete, and it's a great opportunity to get exposure to new teams that we would otherwise never be able to compete with. And attending this tournament will allow our members to grow as a team and in a relationship, as well as be able to represent the university of Dayton to other teams and spectators that come to the event. The travel cost to transport both our teams, we have two teams with 19 girls. So the travel cost is going to be pretty substantial to our program due to the location. We're all going to have to fly to Arizona, and we've budgeted this to be around $7,600 for all of our players to go. As a club, we've already been able to raise funds to pay for the registration for the tournament, which is about $2,000, as well as the cost of hotels for overnight stay, which was about $6,600. So on our own, we've already been able to fund about half of the expense, but the additional funding from the SGA would be greatly appreciated because it'll help ease even more additional financial stress on our club. And we are going to continue to raise funds throughout the spring. We've applied for the spring funding. We take club dues. We're going to do some restaurant takeovers. We hosted a home tournament, which is a fundraiser for us, and we're going to have a sticker sale. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to raise enough. However, it is a lot of money off of our account, so this funding would help us remain in our budget and leave some in the account for the next year and help all of our players be able to participate in the national tournament. Thanks for your consideration. Oh, yes. Are there any questions?
It looks like there aren't any questions, so thank you so much for your presentation. And this will be followed by Senate floor, where the Senate will make a decision.
Thank you.
And then we have one more special request. This is a new organization funding grant from the Culinary Club. So we have Ben Bittner presenting. We'd like to welcome you to the podium, and you have the floor.
Thank you, James. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Benjamin Bittner. I go by Ben or Benji. Really, just whatever fuels your fancy. So, I am representing the University of Dayton Culinary Club. I'm the founder and serving president. So first I'll go ahead and start with the mission. The mission of the University of Dayton Culinary Club is to seek and create and promote an interest in the culinary arts within the student body. We strive to create a body of independent cooks regardless of their background and knowledge in the field. So this is my officer team. I am a one-man show today. As you can see, a majority of my team is SGA people. So why a culinary club? I know that's a question on your guys' mind. So before my time at the University of Dayton, a majority of my free time revolved around prepping and preparing food. Cooking is a way for me to unite my friends and family and celebrate our lives over a good home-cooked meal. After arriving at the University of Dayton, I began to miss what I've grown to love because I live in Stewart. I really don't have the ability to do anything other than sleep. And I decided that I wanted to share my love for the culinary arts with the campus, thus the Culinary Club was born. Our goal is to provide a safe space for students to practice skills and techniques, all while fostering a community of friends and peers around campus. So now the big stuff, which is what you want to see. So I am requesting the full $1,000 for the new club grant to buy various materials that would allow me to run the club for the projected size that I see. So I'll give you a minute to read over that because it is a lot of info. So a couple things I want to touch on that you may not understand is a garage cabinet, for lack of a better term. CSI does not offer storage, so we are currently looking into places to keep equipment because I don't want to lug a stand mixer from Stewart to Adele where I plan to cook. That's quite the haul. And things such as marketing materials. So I did apply for spring funding, but cooking is very expensive, so I was forced to put $500 for capital and $500 for supplies for ingredients, so I was really not able to budge enough money for marketing materials. Safety equipment. This includes gloves, aprons, hairnets, first aid kits. That way we align with food safety standards and with COVID standards. So the impact of this grant on our community, kitchen supplies are really expensive if you've ever shopped for friends, family, or yourself. This grant would allow us to buy the necessary equipment we need to function as a club. We did, as I said earlier, apply for fall funding, but we were not able to get the money that we felt necessary for our club to function. As I said earlier, I have literally zero marketing materials. For Up the Orcs, I paid money out of my own pocket to create stuff to bring to Up the Orcs. And we hope to use money to pay for logos and stuff to where we can be as competitive as other clubs on campus. And we'd like to use, so going back, the stand mixer and stuff is very expensive. My hope is to make some of that equipment for public use by creating like Google Forms to where people can sign it out. That way we know who has it and have them sign safety forms and such, because that is quite a hefty bill. I'm willing to take any questions at this point in my presentation.
Hi Ben. How many members do you have in your club right now?
So when created the club, I did not project more than 20. I'm currently sitting at 40 members, and it is growing by the week. So I think after my first event, which will be in the coming weeks, I see in the next 2 or 3 weeks after this meeting, I'm projecting around 50 people to be in the club.
This is me just saying, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
Ben, have you had any events yet for the club where members are there?
So I know you guys aren't going to like the answer to this, but the answer is no, and I do have a reason behind that because I just got spring funding last week was when I was approved, so I literally have not been able to hold any events because of that. And then one more thing I'd like to mention, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. I know this will probably be your guys' question. I do not have any club fees. I don't see that as a necessity at the moment with us being a new club. and I'm trying to pull people in and to get them interested, and I don't think having club fees attached to that would draw people into our club, and I think that approach has worked so far with how many people I do have involved in our club at the moment. I can take any other questions.
You said you have about 40 members in the club right now. How do you necessitate or determine that those are 40 active members if you haven't yet had any events yet?
So multiple members have reached out to get the progress of the club, and of those 40 members, it's people I've met in SGA, RHA, and other clubs, so it's people I have talked to that are interested and I know will have the time. I have also sent out multiple forms to make sure I can make them active members by getting times that work with everyone. And about 75% of my membership can meet on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights, so I project that out of the 40, about 30 will be able to come to meetings monthly.
This is more of like, maybe you should do this, because the hard part is kickstarting it from the ground when it first starts. Have you thought about partnering with sustainability?
I have not, but I would be open to possibly doing that if you'd like. I mean, you can, next slide has my contact info, and I mean, you guys do have my contact info, so if you guys have any ideas, feel free to reach out. Something I'm trying to look into at the moment is possibly partnering with UDEMS, or having somebody come in to teach us first aid, and then to get back, we cook for them, sort of thing, like an agreement like that to get us more done. I can take any other questions. Okay, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ben.
I just want to get a quick raise of hands. How many voting members of Senate are in Culinary Club?
Bailey and Raleigh aren't here. So.
We're not going to vote on this week.
That's up to you.
I mean, we can't pass it.
It's your rodeo, man. I'm just here.
I think we would have been fine if Jess was here, but this is what she is.
Would you like me to come back next week when you guys vote on it?
If you have 11 people, even if someone abstains, wait, do you need 12 now?
We're right at 11 voting members, or 12.
Do you need 11 or 12 now?